Hello and welcome to Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. My name is Kelly and I'm a former wedding planner and blogger, and I'm obsessed with weddings. If you're planning a wedding in Ireland, you're in the right place. You're going to learn the tried and tested methods to planning your dream wedding without the added stress. Think of this as your one-stop shop for everything to do with planning your wedding in Ireland, with me, your new wedding planning bestie, and a cup of tea. This is Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. Well, hello and happy Wednesday. Welcome to the latest episode of Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online. It is also part 3 of our 3-part series all about wedding websites. So in part 1, we spoke about everything you need to have on your wedding website. In part 2, which was last week, I walked you through the wedding website frequently asked questions. So anything that your guests will probably want to know, how you can tactfully provide answers to those questions. And then today, we're talking all about the About Us section of your wedding website. I'm going to walk you through how to write that. But first, I'm going to tell you why it's an important part of your website and why you need to have one. So now, if you have never written a story, and if you've never tried to tell your story as a couple, it can be very tempting to just skip this part altogether. But it's a great way to launch your wedding website. It's something really helpful to have on the website before you've got all the key details that guests will need closer to the time. So, we've already listed all the other things that you need on your website. But for example, people might come to the website closer to the time to get the link to your live stream. Maybe the RSVP information isn't, maybe you've got the link, but there's some information that people need to get before or later. It's always good to have something on the website when all these other details are still coming together. And the About Us section is a really meaningful part of your website. It helps to tell the story of who you are. It also helps guests get to know you if they know you, but they don't know your partner, or maybe they know your partner, but not you. Maybe you've got some distant relatives that you haven't been able to introduce your partner to. And you probably have some guests who don't actually know how you and your partner even met. So this is a really lovely part of the website. It adds a bit of life and heart. It's not just all details and facts and links to taxi services and accommodation options, but it actually adds something very special. It helps your guests get very excited for the wedding, and it helps to remind them of what the purpose of the whole celebration is, and that is you as a couple. So I'm going to walk you through some do's and don'ts for creating the About Us part of your website, from me as a writer to you. Maybe you don't have a lot of experience, but I'm going to help you tell your story. So the first thing you want to start with an introduction. This is writing 101. You don't just go straight in. You always have an introduction, and your introduction, sure, your friends and family, they know who you are, but you want to introduce yourselves anyway. So here are some things that you could include in your intro. You could include your full names, your hometown, where you live now, maybe where you went to school if that's an applicable piece of information. You could talk a little bit about what jobs you have, and if there's space and time, and if it's interesting, something about the hobbies that you have, especially if there are things that you guys have bonded over as a couple. Another do is keep it chronological. This is probably the simplest, easiest, and most straightforward thing you can do, is to have your story be, from start to finish, chronological order. That's the most sensical way to tell the story, unless there is a reason that it makes sense to tell it in another way. But what works really well is to have your introduction and to then begin your story with how you met and into your first date. And then you can add a few other details. It could be things like, what you and your partner enjoy doing together. And then you end with the proposal story in there as well. And I'll tell you how to end the whole About Us section. Don't share too many details. So there'll be bits of your love story that you think should be private. You'll know what those things are, but my advice is to share the story with your partner so that they can also confirm if they're happy with parts of the story being included. So they might not want their guests to know how they said I love you for the first time. You might not want your friends and family to know that you were hungover on the day that your partner proposed. Those are the kinds of things that you just need to consider if you want to include them or not. And in case this needs to be said, I recommend avoiding personal details like your actual address and your phone number, just for safety purposes. So of course, if you want to talk about your hometown, great, just don't give your actual street address and postcode. Another do for this is add some personality. This is not a university assignment. It's not a school paper. This is your love story. So make it fun, make it, make it lighthearted, add some humor where you can, add some personality, tell stories. But of course, you don't want to make jokes at the expense of anyone, especially your partner, but you do want to add personality so you can bring the story to life. Do consider writing individual stories. Now, if your story is particularly long, it might make sense to break it up. So there's like one paragraph written by you, one paragraph written by your partner, and you're kind of alternating. It's even funnier if you have different accounts of the same thing. If you've remembered things differently, or if your version of the story is slightly different, it just adds to the fun and the humor of the story. But that's totally up to you. My advice is if you are going to write a story together, you could either write the story in the first person and then you each have your bit. So the first person would be something like, I went to the shop. That's first person. Or you could write the whole story in the third person. So it could be Glenn and Kelly met at school. So that kind of thing is just helpful to know from the beginning which way you're going to write so that you can keep that consistent. And then depending on if you're writing individual stories or if you're writing together, it just helps to keep that flow of which perspective you're writing from. The third person is a very helpful one if you're writing a long story together, because it just makes it easier to tell the story. If you're telling the story and you're saying, I did this and I did that, it can be a bit confusing about who has said that. But if it's in the third person, you can say, Glenn said this, Kelly said that, and then it's quite clear. Next thing, don't make it too long. 300 words, absolute maximum. We're not going for, thousands of words. We're not going for a book that people can flip through. This is really a short story of who you are as a couple, how you met. And so you can break things down into sections, and that's actually a writer's hack. Instead of having your whole story in one long, group of text, you can break it down into sections. So you could have one paragraph about how you met, one paragraph about the proposal. You can have another paragraph about some happy memories. So breaking it into little paragraphs, little sections just makes it easy on the eyes to read. And it makes something that might feel long actually feel a little bit shorter and easier to digest. This is how you want to end the whole About Us section of your wedding website. You want to end with something about your wedding, because that's the whole point, isn't it? And so whether you've written the rest of the story in the third person, I recommend ending in the first person. And you want to say something about the day. It can be something like this. I'll give you 2 examples. Option 1, we can't wait to celebrate with you at our wedding in August. Simple, straightforward. It's not super crazy. It gets to the point, but that's in the first person. And the other option, after 3 postponements, it's finally time to tie the knot, and we're so happy that you'll be there. So as you can tell, this concludes the story, but it's getting people excited for the wedding. And you can think of something that's unique to you and your partner. If you've had a theme throughout the way that you've written your story, incorporate that theme into the way you end as well. So my advice is when you're planning out what you're going to say, decide on your intro, decide on the end, and decide how you want to fill the middle with your love story. Talk about how you met, talk about what you love about each other, make it personal, inject a little bit of humor, and don't forget that if you are going to make it funny, you don't want to do that at the expense of anyone else, because this is a special story that you want people to love reading. Now, next week is going to be a great episode that I can't wait to share with you. It's all about what to do if you can't afford the wedding that you want to have. So I highly encourage you to come back for that episode, because it's going to be full of very practical tips on ways you can save money but still have the most amazing wedding day. Well, thank you for listening today. The Wedding Wednesdays with Weddings Online podcast is produced by me, Kelly, and mixed, mastered, and edited by Glenn Hartman. For more wedding planning tips, advice, checklists, and more, visit weddingsonline.ie.